Namaste everyone. On today's show, we'll be talking about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We are joined by our live studio audience of teachers, our expert Dr. Dan, a loving mother Evelyn, a teacher Mrs. Marshall, and a community support worker Melanie. Here to discuss his specialization in studies on FASD is our expert Dr. Dan.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm going to get right into it.
Take a look at the brain differences between a normal 6-week-old baby and one that has had alcohol exposure during pregnancy. Please note that this is indicative of a more serious facet of FASD, which is fetal alcohol syndrome. FASD, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, is an umbrella term used to classify a range of disability caused by PAE, or prenatal alcohol exposure. There are 4 types of FASD. There is fetal alcohol syndrome, alcohol-related birth defects, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorders, and partial fetal alcohol syndrome. All are lifelong conditions that cause varying degrees and combinations of physical, mental, and behavioral problems. Malformations may include heart, bone, kidney, vision, or hearing problems. Brain damage will affect cognitive functioning, elective functioning, behavioral problems, and more. A study by the Institute of Health Economics of Alberta found that FASD is one of the leading causes of birth defects and developmental disabilities in Canadian children. However, it is the only one that is largely preventable. So what is the prevalence in Canada? In the same report by the IHE, which conducted a meta-analysis of more than 50 studies, found the range of FASD prevalence in Canadian communities to have a range from 0.02% to 0.5% of the general Canadian community, which translates to 0.2 to 5 per 1,000 population. However, diagnosis may often be delayed or missed entirely because of technical difficulties and the need to involve several professionals in a comprehensive, multidisciplinary diagnostic evaluation. Only a fraction of those affected currently receive a diagnosis. It is estimated that 500 children are born with FASD in Alberta every year. Alarmingly, 30 to 52% of children in our foster care system have FASD. There are a lot of myths about FASD that need to be dispelled.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Now, let me paint a picture of a child with FASD. Let's talk about Andy, an elementary-age child who has issues with sensory overload. Looking at Andy, talking to Andy, you would never know he has FASD because he can articulate well. However, Andy lacks understanding in some situations. Andy is impulsive and has difficulty learning from past experiences. Andy enjoys physical activity. He excels in cooperational team games because he has a good sense of fairness. However, Andy has physical deformities in his hips and spine, making his participation in sports difficult at times. Andy is very trusting in relationships. In school, Andy is proficient in areas such as math and pattern recognition because of his strong visual memory. And joining us now is Andy's mother, Evelyn.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia.
So now that our viewers have been introduced to some of the challenges that individuals with FASD face, we would like to shift our focus onto what we can do to support them. I understand that you have some specific strategies that you use with Andy that seem to have a positive impact. Is this true?
Yes, it is. We found a number of strategies that work with Andy, and I would like to share a few that I believe have been extremely effective. Andy often has trouble dealing with changes. This year, when he started in Mrs. Marshall's class, we implemented a transition plan that we developed at the end of last year. This was extremely important to consider as he often relies on routines and schedules to keep himself focused and calm. The principal also suggested that I help Andy write a letter to Mrs. Marshall to introduce himself and explain some of his interests, strengths, and challenges. The school then arranged for us to meet Mrs. Marshall a few days before school started, which helped Andy feel more comfortable with this change. We have also set up a homework and communication plan this year, where we email one another briefly at the end of each day. Mrs. Marshall uses a short checklist we developed to indicate Andy's behavior throughout the day. She also comments on what I can assist Andy with at home. This strategy has helped to build a routine for Andy and I.
So it sounds to me like open communication between you and the school has been a vital strategy in Andy's success.
Indeed it has, Olivia.
Perfect. So now let's turn to our live studio audience. And now, our next guest for you this evening is Andy's community support worker, Melanie. She has agreed to join us today to talk about a specific strategy that has worked for them.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia.
Thank you for being here, Melanie.
Andy's a great kid, and we have so much fun together in the community.
So, Melanie, tell us about what you do to help Andy when you spend time with him in the community.
Well, one strategy that I have found works is something that we just kind of stumbled upon. One day I noticed that Andy was playing with a toy moose. He quickly grew attached to the moose and began carrying it with him everywhere. Because Andy seemed to enjoy having this toy with him, I didn't mind if he brought it with us to the library or even swimming. Everywhere we went, Moose had to come also. I was able to use Andy's attachment with his moose to help him engage in activities or complete various tasks. For example, if we were at the library, I could say something like, "Would you like to read that page out loud to Moose?" Andy would then begin to read. So I used this strategy to help with his literacy skills. So Moose acted as a good motivator for Andy, and I think this repetition and consistency really helped when Andy was faced with something new.
Do you have any advice for those kids who don't have a direct attachment, such as Andy and Moose?
Well, as we know, every child is different, and so different strategies will work. I would just suggest that you find out what that specific child is interested in and try to incorporate it somehow into their routines.
Isn't that interesting? Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for sharing that piece of insight. So now let's shift our focus to the school environment. We'll hear from Dr. Dan about some ways FASD could present in the classroom. Welcome back, Dr. Dan.
So, what does FASD look like in your classroom? Because FASD is brain damage, expect a range of cognitive and behavioral deficits as well as learning disabilities. Remember that FASD is a spectrum, so the following traits associated with FASD do not all need to be present. Students with FASD often have poor and delayed motor skills. Look for this in phys ed class. They have on and off days. Can be extremely fluent verbally, but lack comprehension of what they are actually talking about. Have sensory overload in loud settings or chaotic environments. And finally, react negatively to changes in routine. This shows the variety and extensiveness of the spectrum. But don't worry, teachers, I'm not expecting you to remember this detailed list. There are great resources that are available for us to use, such as fasd.alberta.ca. What should teachers know about diagnosing FASD? Well, it's complicated. In Canada, a diagnosis usually requires collaboration of a physician specifically trained in FASD diagnosis, a psychologist, an occupational therapist, and a speech-language pathologist, often all coordinated by a social worker. Having the professionals enter dialogue with the mother is also very important to determine how much alcohol was consumed during pregnancy. But this is not always possible. 3D modeling software has been developed to identify FAS through facial features. While this program is accurate, there are many individuals with FASD who do not exhibit these physical traits. As with any exceptionality, an early diagnosis is essential for future success.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Now we would like to take a minute to talk to Andy's teacher, Mrs. Marshall. We are looking forward to hearing about the strategies implemented in the classroom.
Hi, everyone.
So I see here that Andy is oversensitive to his surroundings due to a sensory processing disorder. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So visual stimuli within the classroom can be very distracting, and this can lead to overstimulation. Students in classrooms where visual stimulation has been reduced have a much less hyperactive behavior and are better able to pay attention. Since Andy shows sensitivity to sensory overload, we have devised a few strategies that are easy to implement in the classroom, which were inspired from a great resource by Healthy Child Manitoba. These are easy to implement and won't take much time away from the rest of the class, if at all. First off, we have placed Andy at a desk that faces a blank wall, and the desk itself is clear of clutter. This allows Andy to focus on the task in front of him rather than on any busyness that surrounds him. If possible, we try to eliminate other distractions in the classroom as well, such as keeping doors closed over bookshelves, and we don't hang things from the ceiling. Another strategy that we use in the classroom is a common corner. In our classroom, we use a tent set up in the corner that contains calm down tools such as soothing music and doodle paper. Andy or any other student can go into the calming corner when they feel a behavior coming on as a way to self-regulate. Breaks are also important to be built in throughout the day to allow Andy some time to rest from the hard work he needs to perform his school tasks. We also have a set of headphones that can be worn in or out of the tent so that Andy may wear them if the classroom is getting to be too noisy to concentrate on his work.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Marshall. Now let's turn back to our live studio audience. Now that we've had a chance to meet Andy, I think it's very important to stress that when you've met one child with FASD, you've only met one child with FASD. I'd like to take a moment to thank my guests for coming on today's show. Next week, we will be talking about depression. I'm Olivia Oliver with Exceptionality TV. Stay exceptional, folks.